Imagine a world where queens weren't just decorative, but the ones writing the laws, leading the armies, and deciding the fate of empires. Yeah, forget the damsel in distress. Let's talk about the queen with the sword, the scholar with the crown, the healer running the state, and none of them asking for permission. What if the Middle Ages weren't ruled by men obsessed with land and legacy, but by women who had been denied power for centuries? What would society look like if compassion, community, and let's be real, basic hygiene had a seat on the throne? This isn't just a fantasy, it's a feminist reimagining of the darkest, bloodiest, and most patriarchal chapter in history. Welcome to the world where women ruled the Middle Ages. And trust me, things get very different. In a world where women ruled medieval kingdoms, the political map of Europe would have looked a whole lot less like a boys' club and more like a strategy board run with actual emotional intelligence. Forget feudal squabbles over ego and entitlement. With women in charge, diplomacy might have actually been diplomatic. Instead of endless wars over who had the longest sword or the biggest land claim, we'd likely see coalitions based on trade, mutual benefit, and dare we say it, peace. And no, we're not saying women are incapable of being ruthless, but in this version of history, feminine leadership wouldn't be the exception, it'd be the norm. That means more inclusive councils, less bloodline obsession, and possibly the birth of early democratic ideas, centuries before they arrived in our timeline. Imagine political power not being hoarded by a few crusty old men, but distributed with equity. Imagine policies written with children, workers, and even other women in mind. Revolutionary, right? Turns out, giving half the population a voice might have made the world a little less brutal and a lot more just. If women had ruled the medieval world, war wouldn't vanish, but it sure wouldn't look like a testosterone-fueled contest of who could burn the most villages. Let's be real, men waged war like it was a rite of passage. Every slight, every inheritance dispute, every bruised ego turned into a bloody campaign. Now imagine a ruling class that didn't treat violence as the first language of power. Matriarchal rule doesn't mean pacifism, it means purpose. Defense over dominance, strategy over chaos, less pillaging, more protecting. We'd see armies led by women who valued life over legacy, who didn't need to prove their strength with endless battles, but showed it by keeping their people alive. And when war did happen, expect more innovation, smarter logistics, and actual consequences for war crimes. Because let's not pretend women wouldn't hold tyrants accountable. Also, no more erasing female warriors. From the Trung sisters to Joan of Arc, history is full of women who fought but were treated like flukes. In this timeline, they're not exceptions, they're generals. So yes, there'd still be wars, but maybe, just maybe, fewer would die for the sake of one man's fragile legacy. In a medieval world ruled by women, everyday life wouldn't just shift at the top, it would transform everywhere. From the village well to the royal court, society would finally center the people it relied on most: women. Labor would be redefined. Domestic work, so often dismissed as women's work, would be seen for what it truly is: essential infrastructure. Childcare, food production, healing, teaching. These wouldn't be invisible duties. They'd be respected professions, possibly even publicly funded or state-supported. Marriage wouldn't be a contract to control women's bodies or tie them to men's property. Love, partnership, and autonomy might take the lead. And single mothers? Not scandalized, but supported. Widows wouldn't vanish into poverty. Daughters wouldn't be sold off like economic burdens. Education would expand, with girls learning more than needlepoint. Science, literature, and philosophy would welcome female minds centuries before they did in our reality. Literacy rates would soar, and with that, the ability for women to write, record, and shape their own stories. Even fashion would evolve. Less corset, more comfort. Because when women lead, utility and dignity matter more than impressing a lord at court. This isn't a utopia, but it's a world where women live, not under rule, but in full color. In a medieval world ruled by women, the economy wouldn't just shift, it would be restructured from the ground up. The unpaid, invisible labor that held society together, like cooking, caregiving, cleaning, healing, wouldn't be ignored. It would be valued. And yes, we're talking about actual wages, not just praise at harvest festivals. A female-led system might prioritize collective well-being over hoarding wealth. Trade guilds would include women as masters and apprentices. Artisans, midwives, spinners, and farmers would have seats at economic tables, not because they were exceptions, but because they were essential. Property laws would evolve too. Women wouldn't need male guardians to own land or run businesses. In fact, matrilineal inheritance could be the norm. Wealth would pass through mothers, not just fathers, giving rise to stable, community-based economies where resources stayed close to home. Tax systems might shift focus from funding endless wars to funding infrastructure, schools, wells, and care systems. And poverty, often feminized and ignored, would be addressed head-on by rulers who understood it firsthand. This isn't charity, it's equity. It's a medieval economy where labor is measured not by gender, but by its true value to society. And spoiler, women have always carried more than their share. If women ruled the medieval world, the gates of education would have swung wide open, not just for the privileged few, but for everyone. No more girls barred from reading sacred texts or banned from speaking in public spaces. In this world, knowledge wouldn't be locked away in monasteries guarded by men, but it would be shared, taught, and passed down through mothers, mentors, and wise women. Education would be seen not as a threat to order, but a tool for liberation. Girls would learn to read, write, debate, and lead, not in secret, but in public. And boys, they'd learn from women, from birth, about empathy, collaboration, and how intellect isn't a male monopoly. Universities might include healing arts taught by midwives, political theory by queens, and science by women who studied the stars long before men took credit. Oral tradition would be honored alongside written word, and lived experience would carry weight in classrooms. And with literacy comes revolution. Women could write their own laws, tell their own histories, and challenge any doctrine that kept them silent. In this world, education isn't a privilege, it's a right. And it wouldn't just empower women, it would transform the entire world. If women had ruled the Middle Ages, love and marriage wouldn't have been cages, they'd have been choices. Forget transactional dowries and political marriages where girls were traded like livestock. In this world, marriage wouldn't be a woman's destiny, it'd be one option among many. Consent wouldn't be a radical idea, it'd be the baseline. Female rulers wouldn't tolerate laws that let men own their wives' bodies. Marriage contracts would be mutual, not one-sided. And sex, it wouldn't be about control, purity, or punishment. It'd be about pleasure, health, and agency. Virginity wouldn't be treated like currency. Queer relationships, so often erased or punished, might find legitimacy in a society that values emotional connection over patriarchal tradition. Love wouldn't be legislated, it would be lived openly and safely. Divorce wouldn't mean disgrace, but it would mean freedom from toxic unions. Single women wouldn't be pitied, they'd be respected. Widows would lead households, not be sent to convents to rot in silence. In this world, intimacy is not a weapon nor a contract. It's a human experience, respected, honored, and protected. So no, a matriarchal medieval society wouldn't be a fairy tale. But at least in this version, love wouldn't feel like a life sentence. If women had ruled the Middle Ages, the world wouldn't be a softer version of patriarchy, it would be a challenge to it. This isn't fantasy, it's a reminder. Women were always powerful, they just weren't allowed to rule. But they existed, they resisted, and now we remember. Drop your thoughts below. Like, subscribe, and stay loud. Because history isn't just his story anymore, it's ours.